Some mornings come in the same way they always have. Same coffee, same thermos, same gravel lot at the end of the same road you've driven for 19 years. You stop expecting anything to be different. Most of us do, after a while. But every now and then, something is waiting for you when you arrive, something small. Something that had no reason to still be there. And the fact that it stayed is the thing that quietly breaks you open. This is a story about a man who thought he'd made his peace with being alone, about a dog that waited 3 days in the Arizona cold, and about the 3 minutes on an empty highway that changed both of them. The phone box had taken on water overnight, one corner caved in soft, dark from the rain, and Mike saw it before he cut the engine. He sat with the truck running, steam rising off the thermos on the dash. He got out, gravel still wet, his boots on the asphalt. November desert air, thin and sharp the way it gets before 7 in the morning. He walked closer. He stopped. Above the rim of the collapsed box, just above it, 2 eyes. Brown, unmoving, not blinking, not frightened, not asking. Just watching him the way something watches you when it has already made its decision and is simply waiting to find out if that was a mistake. Mike looked away first. He walked to the shop door, found his key, unlocked it. He did not look back. 3 days, and he still hadn't learned her name. If this story found you this morning, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. There's something about knowing a good story traveled far that makes it mean a little more. The coffee maker took 11 minutes. Mike knew this because he'd counted it once, years ago, and never forgot. He filled the reservoir, hit the switch, and stood at the workbench while the machine started its slow, unimpressed gurgling. Carter's Auto Repair, 1 bay, hand-painted sign, white letters on green, edges peeling where the desert heat got under the paint every summer. The walls held 19 years of grease the way old wood holds smoke. A 1994 Motorola radio on the shelf above the socket rack. Antenna bent at a permanent 45 degrees, still pulling in KXW without complaint. A wall calendar last year's never replaced. A single folding chair against the south wall for customers who needed to wait. Nobody had sat in it lately. He pulled on his work gloves, walked the length of the bay. The Silverado from yesterday was still on the lift, exhaust half done. He crouched, checked the joint, cold metal, solid connection. He'd finish it by 10. The radio came on mid-song, something with a steel guitar. He moved to the back, found a clean rag, tucked it in his belt, reached for the thermos and stopped. On the floor behind the oil drum, sitting in the gap between the drum and the wall, was a ceramic bowl. Blue rim, chipped on one side. A clean break that had happened so long ago he couldn't tell you when. He could tell you the year, maybe. He could tell you what the weather had been like that week. He didn't touch it. He poured his coffee into the thermos instead. Screwed the lid. The coffee maker went quiet. Outside. Traffic on Route 178, a pickup, a semi, then nothing. Ridgecrest mornings were like that. Things passed through. Most things didn't stop. He picked up a wrench. He went back to the Silverado. From under the chassis, through the open bay door, he had a direct line of sight to the front lot. He wasn't looking. He was looking at the exhaust coupling, at the threading, at the particular way rust forms at a joint when the seal goes soft. His hands went still. The foam box was 12 feet away. The dog was sitting up, and she was looking directly at him, not at the door, not at the street, at him, like she'd known exactly where he was the whole time. Mike slid out from under the Silverado. Not fast, just out. He set the wrench on the floor beside him, stood, and brushed dust from his knees by habit. He looked at the lot through the open bay door. She hadn't moved. Still sitting, Still watching the exact spot beneath the truck where he'd been working, like she'd tracked the sound of the wrench through the concrete, through the chassis, through the 12 feet of cold November air between them. He went back to work. The exhaust coupling took 40 minutes. When he finished, he lowered the lift, pulled the Silverado out to the south wall. The clock above the register said 9:14. He washed his hands at the utility sink cold water. Orange soap, the kind that never fully cut the grease no matter how long you worked it. When he looked up through the window, she was still there. He dried his hands, opened the small refrigerator under the counter, found a gas station bag with 2 hot dogs from yesterday, one left. He took it out. He stood at the edge of the bay door. She was maybe 15 feet out now. Not under the sign anymore. She'd moved while he was under the truck just a few feet. But she'd moved. He threw the hot dog underhand. Easy. It landed 6 inches from the box. She didn't go toward it. Didn't pull back either. Her eyes stayed on him. He went inside and watched through the smudged window above the register. 2 minutes. Maybe 3. She lowered her head, ate it in 3 bites, looked back up at the closed door. Frank Bueller's F-150 pulled in at 11:22. Mike heard the 3rd cylinder knock before Frank cut the engine, same rattle since August. Same problem Frank kept putting off. Frank was 68, retired Postal Service, 31 years on the same route. He still turned left out of habit in empty parking lots. He got out and saw the dog before he saw Mike. Well now. He pushed his cap back and crouched, hand extended low, palm open, patient, the kind of patience that costs something to develop. Who's this little lady? Mike stepped to the doorway. Nobody's. She was here when I got in. Yesterday. Yeah. Frank kept his hand out. The dog's nose moved one small forward motion, but she didn't come closer. Her ears stayed flat. Frank studied the rope end around her neck, frayed at the knot side, the cut end still tight and clean. She's been out here a while, he said. Look at those ribs. I noticed. He straightened up. His knees took a moment. You call county? Not yet, but you will. Mike said nothing, pulled the invoice off the clipboard and held it out. Frank didn't take it right away. You know what they do with strays that don't get claimed? I know what they do, Frank. Then, you know, there's a window. He finally took the invoice, didn't read it, folded it in half, and put it in his breast pocket. Frank told me about Rex once, years ago. He looked at the dog one more time, then at Mike. That was a good dog. He walked inside to settle up and said nothing else about it. By 3 o'clock, the clouds had moved in hard from the northwest. Mike could read the temperature by feel, the particular wet cold that came off the Mojave when a front pushed through. Damp in a way that got under a jacket. Low 40s by dark, maybe lower. He went to the back storage room, found a foam shipping box, refrigerator part size, carried it out front, scored 3 lines in the side with his box cutter and folded the flap down a doorway. Rough but functional. Went inside, came back with a shop rag folded twice. Set it on the bottom. He found a spare oil change tray near the door, rinsed it at the utility sink, filled it with water from the tap, set it beside the box. He placed everything against the front wall under the overhang. He did not look at her while he did it. At 5:30, he locked the bay door. Keys in hand. The lot was going gray. He stood there for a moment in the cold. He said it quietly, like a man talking to himself, if you're still here in a couple days, I'll think about it. He got in his truck and drove. He did not call animal control. The radio came on, a woman's voice reading the overnight forecast. He turned it off before she finished the sentence. His house was 3 rooms and a carport. Mike heated leftover chili on the stove, standing, eating over the sink the way he did most nights. The TV in the living room ran the evening news, something about a water authority dispute in Kern County. Then a car dealership ad. Then weather. He watched the weather. The forecaster pointed at a blue mass moving across the Mojave corridor. Overnight lows near 38 for the valley floor. Desert showers pushing through by 10. 11 p.m. Clearing before dawn. Mike set the bowl in the sink, rinsed it, turned off the TV. He sat on the couch for a while with the lamp on, doing nothing in particular. His work boots were on the floor beside the coffee table. There was a week-old newspaper he hadn't read. There was a remote control he'd put down and not picked back up. By 10 o'clock, he was in bed. He heard it before he was fully under. Rain on the metal porch awning. Hard, fast. The kind that meant business, not a California drizzle, but a real front pushing through. Drops fat enough to make the gutters work. The sound filled the room the way desert rain does when it finally comes, like it means to make up for lost time. Mike stared at the ceiling. The foam box had a folded shop rag on the bottom and 3 sides of insulation and 1 open doorway cut with a box cutter. The oil change tray with water was beside it. The overhang cleared about 18 inches out from the wall, and the box was deeper than that, and the left side, the weak side, sat exposed past the overhang's edge. He did the math without meaning to. 38 degrees. Rain. Wet cardboard loses its insulation value in under an hour. A dog that size, maybe 12 pounds, maybe less, burns through body heat fast when wet. He did not get up. He lay there and listened to the rain and told himself she'd found shelter before he arrived, which meant she knew how to manage. She wasn't his dog. He hadn't made a promise. He'd made a conditional statement to an animal that couldn't understand language, said it quietly, half to himself, and it didn't count. The rain came harder. He turned onto his side. At 2:30, he was still awake. The rain had thinned to a steady low sound, less urgent now, but not finished. The room was dark. The clock on the nightstand put out a faint orange glow that lit nothing useful. He wasn't thinking about the dog. He was thinking about the way a vet's office smells at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. Floor cleaner and something underneath it antiseptic. Or maybe just the particular cold of a room where difficult things happen quietly. The form had a line for the animal's full name, Maxwell Rex Carter, his own handwriting, which had stayed steadier than he'd expected. Border Collie mix, age 9. Rex's tail had been moving when they brought him in. Not much, but moving. Mike had sat in the truck in his own driveway for 40 minutes after. Not crying, not yet, just sitting with his hands on the wheel, engine off, listening to the neighborhood go about its afternoon like nothing had changed in it. He hadn't cried until the 3rd day. He hadn't gotten another dog. The clock read 2:47. He had to be up at 6. He closed his eyes and lay there, open, until the clock read 4:15, and the rain finally stopped and the silence that followed settled into the room like something that had been waiting outside for a long time and had simply decided to come in. The lot was still wet at 7:02. Mike pulled in and cut the engine and sat for a moment with his hand on the key. The morning was pale. That particular gray-white that comes after desert rain, the sky not yet committed to anything. Puddles in the low spots on the asphalt. The smell of wet creosote coming in through the truck's vent. The foam box was still there. The left side had gone soft overnight, collapsed inward at the corner, the way wet cardboard does when it's lost the argument with water. But the overhang had held on the right side, and the shop rag was still visible inside, and the oil change tray with water sat beside it, undisturbed. The dog was in the box, curled in the dry portion, her back against the good wall, her eyes already open and tracking him through the windshield. He got out. He didn't go to the box. He went to the door, found his key, unlocked it. The Motorola came on when he hit the breaker strip. Same station, mid-song. He started the coffee maker and stood at the window. She hadn't moved. She was watching the shop door. He turned and went to work. Deputy Cole Hardin came by at 9:30, not for the car. He drove a county-issued Tahoe with a roof bar and a particular way of parking that took up a space and a half. He came in on Tuesday sometimes when his route brought him out this direction, and Mike kept a second mug on the shelf for it. Cole was 38, lean the way outdoor men go lean. Not from effort, but from years of being outside in dry heat. He poured his own coffee and stood at the bay door and saw the dog in the time it took him to stir in one sugar. She got tags. No tags. Mike didn't look up from the brake caliper he was pulling. Rope end around her neck, cut end. I didn't have her scanned, but there's no collar, no registration plate, nothing. Cole drank his coffee and looked at the box. The dog looked back at him. Neither of them moved. I can call county this afternoon. Have someone out by 3. Mike set the caliper on the bench. Give it another day. Cole turned and looked at him the way a man looks when he's deciding how much to say. He drank his coffee. You feeding her some? How long's she been out there? Since yesterday morning. Cole nodded, set the mug down on the counter, looked back at the lot. The dog had lowered her head to her paws, but her eyes were still open. Still on the doorway. County's got a 72-hour window before the stray classification changes, Cole said. After that, harder to place, especially a mixed breed. Adult, no history. I know the rules. Cole? Just making sure you know the clock. He pulled on his jacket, walked to the door, stopped there for a moment, hand on the frame, looking at the box. He didn't say anything else. He got in the Tahoe and backed out and drove north on 178. He did not radio county dispatch. Mike watched him go. Eleanor Marsh came over at 2 o'clock with a paper bag from the gas station, biscuits wrapped in foil. Still warm, she didn't come to the counter. She went straight to the box and set the bag beside it and crouched down on her heels. She was 61. Gray-brown hair cut practical. Not styled. She'd run the flower shop next door for 12 years, alone for 9 of them since her husband retired to Phoenix, and she'd stayed because the shop was hers and she'd built it, and she wasn't leaving it for anybody. She wore a canvas apron most days, pockets full of stem wire and rubber bands. The dog sniffed at the bag. Didn't eat. Mike watched from the doorway with a wrench in his hand. Eleanor. Don't start. I didn't say anything. She stood up, brushed her knees, looked at him straight. Frank told me about Rex, years ago. I never forgot it. Mike said nothing. She needs a vet, Eleanor said. Look at her. She needs food. She needs warmth. She needs someone who can take care of her. Mike's voice was flat, not raised. That's not a position I'm in right now. Because of Rex. The name hit the air between them and stayed there. Don't, he said. Mike? I said don't. She held her ground. She'd grown up with 3 older brothers in Bakersfield, and she'd learned young that a man going quiet wasn't the same as a man being right. You're not being careful, she said. You're being stingy. She looked at the dog, then back at him. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. Careful means you're protecting something worth keeping. Stingy means you've already decided nothing's worth the risk, so you don't have to feel bad about saying no. She picked up her keys from her apron pocket. That dog has been out here 2 nights. She's not asking you for much. It's not about what she's asking. Then what's it about? He didn't answer. Eleanor looked at him for another moment. Not angry, now, something quieter than that, and in some ways harder to hold against. She turned and walked back toward the flower shop without looking at the dog again. Mike stood in the doorway. The dog looked at him. He went back inside. 4 o'clock, no customers, the radio, the sound of a ratchet. He was under the Silverado again, a different issue this time, a loose heat shield bracket that rattled on acceleration. Small job. His hands worked the bolt on reflex while his eyes tracked the underside of the frame. Through the open bay door, from under the chassis, he had a direct line of sight to the front corner of the lot. He could see her paws, small, dark at the toe pads from the wet asphalt. Still, he slid out, not because the job was done, it wasn't, but because he needed something from the back shelf. He told himself that. He walked past the storage shelf and kept going to the small refrigerator. Opened it. Can of tuna, the kind he kept for his own lunch. He opened it at the counter with the drawer key. He walked out to the lot. He set the can down 4 feet from the box, not close enough to crowd her. He went back inside. He didn't watch. He went back under the Silverado and finished the bracket. When he slid out again and looked through the bay door, the can was empty, and she was back in the box with her nose on her paws. The water tray beside the box was lower than this morning. He put his tools away one at a time, socket to socket, wrench to wrench. 5:30, closing. He pulled the bay door down, locked the register. The lot was going copper in the late sun, the puddles from last night catching the color of the sky. Cold enough now to see his breath in faint clouds when he breathed. He stood in front of the foam box. She was sitting up. The straight ear, not the bent one. The other one lifted slightly, not a full raise. An inch. Maybe less. A question without language. Mike's right hand moved, a few inches off his thigh. He stopped it there. He held it still for a moment he couldn't measure. He turned and got in the truck. He sat with the engine running. The heater kicked on. Warm air across his knuckles. He pulled out of the lot. He told himself he didn't check the mirror. 4 miles out. It occurred to him that tomorrow was the 3rd day. He had said, if you're still here in a couple days. He hadn't said 3. He'd said a couple. He kept driving. The lot was quiet at 6:55. Mike pulled in and the headlights swept the front wall and he saw the box before he saw anything else. He cut the engine. Sat. The left side had gone down further overnight. Not collapsed fully, just surrendered another inch. The wet cardboard giving up what little structure it had left. The overhang had done its job on the right. Barely. The oil-change tray sat where he'd placed it, still holding water. He got out. The air was different this morning. Colder. Yes, but something else, that particular stillness that comes after a second cold night, when even the desert seems to have used up its reserves. His breath came out in a thin white cloud and disappeared. His boots on the wet asphalt made no sound worth noting. He walked to the door, found his key. He stopped. She was sitting in front of the box. Not inside it. In front of it, on the open asphalt, facing the shop door. She'd been waiting facing the door, not the street, not the road she could leave by, the door he came through every morning. Her breathing was visible, small white clouds. Her ribs moved with each one. She looked at him the way she'd looked at him yesterday and the day before, not desperate, not performing, just present. Steady, like she'd made her calculation and was waiting on his. Mike looked at the key in his hand. He unlocked the door and went inside. The coffee maker ran its 11 minutes. He stood at the workbench with his back to the window and pulled on his gloves and looked at the day's work brake job on a Dodge Ram, oil change on the Kellerman Accounts Camry, and the Silverado finally done and ready for pickup. He organized the day in his head the way he always did. Order of arrival, time per job, lunch somewhere in the middle if the morning ran clean. He did not look out the window. The coffee finished. He poured it into the thermos and screwed the lid and set it on the corner of the bench. He picked up the clipboard. He looked out the window. She hadn't moved. She was watching the shop door from the same position, the same angle, the same still attention. The bent ear lay flat and the straight ear was up this morning, fully up. Not the tentative half-inch from yesterday, and her tail was on the asphalt behind her, not moving, just there. He put the clipboard down. Frank's truck came in at 8:40. The knock in the third cylinder had quieted some cold engine. Short drive. The rattle didn't fully show itself until the motor warmed up. Mike heard it pulling in and stepped to the bay door. Frank got out. He looked at the dog the way a man looks at something he already told someone else about. Then he looked at Mike. He didn't say good morning. He didn't say anything right away. He walked to the box, looked at the caved side, looked at the water staining along the bottom edge, looked at the dog sitting in front of it on the wet asphalt. He pushed his cap back, stood there. 3 nights, he said. I know. Frank turned around. His face was doing the thing it did when he decided not to lecture, which in Mike's experience meant the lecture was coming in a different shape. My Jean, he said. He paused. Not for effect, just locating something. She used to say, and I'm not saying this is your situation. I'm just saying what she said she used to say, that some doors you can close, and some you just think you've closed. He put his hands in his jacket pockets. 38 degrees last night. Mike, I know what it was last night. She's still here. I can see that. I don't mean it like an accusation. Frank looked at the dog once more. Then he exhaled through his nose, slow, the way men exhale when they've run out of new ways to say the same thing. I'm just noting it. As a man who's been coming here 11 years, he pulled the folded receipt from yesterday out of his breast pocket and held it up. Forgot to leave my copy. Mike took it, handed him the duplicate off the clipboard. Frank put it in his pocket without reading it. He walked to his truck, opened the door. She's holding on. Mike. He got in. I'll be back Thursday for the filter. He backed out and turned north. Mike watched him go. 8 o'clock, 8:15. He was working the brake job on the ram front rotors, straightforward. The kind of job his hands could do without his full attention, which meant his full attention went somewhere else. Through the open bay door, across 12 feet of morning air, the dog sat. He worked the lug nuts off the left front wheel, set them in the tray, pulled the wheel. The rotor was scored down to bare metal in 2 places. The owner had let it go far past the wear indicators, past the noise, past the grinding, all the way to metal on metal. Mike held it up to the light, ran his thumb across the scoring. Some things you couldn't let go too long. He set it in the discard pile and reached for the new rotor. At 9 o'clock, he came to the door with his thermos. He crouched down on the edge of the bay apron, not moving toward her, just lowering himself to a different level. He unscrewed the thermos lid and held it in both hands and let the steam come up. She watched him. He watched her. The rope end around her neck had dried. The cut end was clean, not frayed the way rope goes when it wears through, not ragged the way it goes when it breaks, straight, deliberate. Someone had put scissors to it on purpose and walked away. He thought about the motion of that, the decision compressed into one clean cut. He stood up, went back inside. At 10:15 she moved. He caught it through the window. She stood up from the asphalt, turned in a small circle, and stepped back into the box. She turned again inside it, slow and careful, and lay down with her chin on the folded shop rag. Her eyes stayed on the door. Mike had his hand on the refrigerator door, reaching for his lunch tuna. He stood there. The can was in his hand before he'd made any decision about it. He walked out, set it 3 feet from the box, closer than yesterday. Closer than he'd meant to go. He straightened up. She was watching his face, not the can. He went back to work. By noon she had eaten, and the water tray was half down, and the straight ear was up, and the bent one had lifted halfway, and Mike had not looked at the clock in 45 minutes without knowing why. Frank's words had lodged somewhere he couldn't locate. Some doors you can close, and some you just think you've closed. He didn't like the way that sat. Closing time. 5:30. The light going copper and long across the lot. His breath showing again in the cold. He stood in front of her box. She was sitting up, both ears raised now, the bent one imperfect, crooked at the tip, but up. Her tail moved twice on the asphalt. Once, twice, then stopped, like she'd thought better of it. Mike looked at her for a long time. 2 days. He'd said a couple of days. She was still here. His hand moved off his thigh 3 inches and stopped. He got in his truck. He started the engine. He sat there with the heater running and both hands on the wheel and stared at the painted green sign on the front of the shop, Carter's Auto Repair. White letters, edges peeling until it blurred at the edges. He pulled out. He drove. The radio came on. A man's voice, low and even. Counting down into a song Mike had heard 100 times and couldn't name tonight. He passed mile marker 2, mile marker 4. At mile marker 6 he reached over without thinking, and his hand landed on the passenger seat and stopped there. Cold vinyl. He pulled his hand back. He turned the radio off. The highway ran straight ahead into the dark. And somewhere behind him a dog had waited 3 nights in a foam box with a caved-in side for a man who kept leaving, and he could not say. Sitting in this truck right now. Whether he was any different from the person who had cut that rope and walked away. Mile marker 6. The radio played something with a fiddle in it. Mike's right hand was on the wheel, left arm on the window ledge, elbow out, the way he always drove. The heater ran on low. The cab smelled like shop soap and cold coffee, and the particular staleness of a truck that had carried one person for too many years. He said at once, into the dark, "She'll be fine." The words went nowhere. They didn't land on anything. They just sat in the air between him and the windshield and dissolved. The way things do when nobody believes them, including the person saying them. He turned the radio up. Mile marker 8. A gas station on the right. Lights on. Nobody at the pumps. Mile marker 9. The highway straightening the way it does past the edge of town. The Joshua trees pulling back from the shoulder. The sky opening into full black. He drove. Mile marker 11. The county line sign coming up on the left. His eyes went to the passenger door. Not on purpose, just the way your eyes go to something when your guard is down and the dark outside is flat and there's nothing else to look at. The dent. Passenger side. Low on the panel. Just above the rocker. The size of a cantaloupe. Roughly. Paint cracked at the center. The metal pushed in clean, the kind of impact that happens fast. At an angle, from something that didn't see it coming. He had the tools to fix it. He'd had them for 6 years. He fixed dents professionally, had turned down money from Frank twice when Frank offered to pay for a much smaller ding on his tailgate. Mike had said, "Don't worry about it," and fixed it in 20 minutes on a slow Tuesday and refused the $40. He had never touched this one. He sat with that for a moment. Not the grief of it. He knew the grief. He'd carried the grief so long it had become structural, like a beam you stop noticing because the house is still standing. What sat differently tonight was something lower and less familiar. The specific discomfort of a man looking at something he's been pretending is one thing while knowing it is another. He hadn't kept the dent to honor Rex. He'd kept it to stay unavailable, as long as the wound was visible and unrepaired. He had a reason. For the empty passenger seat, for the bowl behind the oil drum. For every morning he'd unlock the shop alone and called it preference instead of what it was. He gripped the wheel. Mile marker 14. The road sign for a crossroads he never took. He thought about the rope end. Cut, not untied, not worn through on a fence or a nail. Cut with scissors. One motion. Close range. Whoever did it had been standing right there close enough to smell her, close enough to hear her breathing, and they had decided. Compressed everything into one clean motion and walked away from a living thing that had done nothing to deserve it. He had driven away from the same dog 3 times now. He hadn't used scissors. He'd used a truck and a highway and 19 years of practice at leaving before anything could cost him. Different tools. The motion was the same. His foot came off the accelerator, not to the brake, just off the gas. The truck slowing by friction on a flat road. Coasting. Losing speed without drama. Drifting toward the shoulder until Mike let it go there, gravel under the tires. The white line off to his left. He put it in park. Engine running. Heater on low. The fiddle song long gone, replaced by a late-night talk block, a man explaining something procedural to someone in another state. Calm and indifferent. The sound of a world going about itself. He sat, hands on the wheel, the dent in his peripheral vision on the left, the road ahead going straight into nothing he needed to reach tonight. His reflection sat in the dark windshield glass, faint, partial, the way a face looks when there's nothing behind it to give it contrast. He looked at it the way you look at something when you're not sure you recognize it. He'd spent 6 years building a version of himself that could not be touched. He'd succeeded. He sat in the truck on the shoulder of Highway 178 and tried to locate, in the full accounting of the last 3 days, one thing he'd done that he was not ashamed of. The heater ran, the engine idled, he couldn't find one. The engine idled. Mike sat with both hands on the wheel and stared at the highway and did not move. The heater pushed warm air across his knuckles. The talk radio ran on a man explaining something about municipal bond rates to a caller in Ohio. Calm and procedural. The sound of a world conducting its business at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday night. He reached over and turned it off. Quiet now. Just the engine. Just the heater fan on its lowest setting. Just the sound of his own breathing in a truck cab on a highway shoulder 14 miles outside of a town he'd lived in for 19 years without once asking himself whether he'd chosen it or just stopped moving. He put his hand on the passenger seat. The vinyl was cold. He'd had the seat detailed once, a few years back, a professional job, the kind that gets the smell out. He hadn't been able to say what smell he was trying to remove. The detailer had done the whole interior, and Mike had driven home and parked in the carport and sat for a long time before going inside. He pressed his palm flat against the seat. The cold came through his hand, and he kept it there anyway. Rex had ridden in that seat for 9 years. Not in the back. Never in the back. Mike had tried it once, early on, and Rex had climbed over the console with the determined awkwardness of a 40-pound dog who had already decided where he belonged, and Mike had laughed, actually laughed, alone in the truck, at the sheer stubbornness of it, and that had been the end of the discussion. Every morning for 9 years. Passenger seat, head out the window on warm days, chin on the door ledge on cold ones. Rex had a way of sighing when they turned onto the shop road that Mike had come to understand as something specific, the sound of a creature who knew where he was going and was glad about it. Mike had talked to him, not commands, not corrections, just talked, about the jobs coming in, about the weather, about the way the Mojave went gold for 3 weeks every October before going brown again. That brief window when the light hit the desert floor at an angle that made everything look like it meant something. Rex had listened to Serene the way Rex always listened, whole body, slightly oriented toward Mike, ears up, present in a way Mike had never found in any human conversation and had stopped looking for some time in his mid-30s. He had not talked to anyone like that since. He had not wanted to. He had arranged his days so that he didn't have to try. His hand was still on the seat when he thought about her tail. Not the full wag, the small one, The twice then stopped on the asphalt at closing time. The thought better of it motion, the way she'd pulled it back like she wasn't sure she'd earned it. 12 feet from a man who had been throwing tuna cans in her direction and building foam boxes and finding reasons to stay on his side of the bay door for 3 days straight. And she had wagged her tail twice and stopped herself. Mike took his hand off the seat. He put it back on the wheel, outside. The Joshua trees stood in the wash of the headlights. The same as always, arms up, patient. The kind of patience that doesn't come from peace, but from long exposure to conditions that don't change on anyone's schedule. He thought about the form. Maxwell Rex Carter. He'd written all 3 words. Nobody had asked him to. The form just said animal name, and he had written every word in his regular handwriting. The same hand he used for invoices and tax checks. And it had stayed steadier than he'd expected. He hadn't understood why he insisted on the full name until this moment. Sitting on a highway shoulder at 11:15 on a Wednesday, he'd wanted there to be a document. Somewhere in a filing cabinet in a vet's office in Kern County, a piece of paper that showed Rex had belonged to someone who took it seriously. That he hadn't just been a dog. That he had been Maxwell Rex Carter. All 3 words, with someone's steady handwriting underneath it. He looked at the dent. He had fixed it in his mind 100 times. Heat the metal, work the edge inward, blend the paint at the repair margin. 2 hours, maybe less. The tools were on the shelf in the shop. The paint code was written on a piece of masking tape inside his top drawer. He'd looked it up 3 years ago. Written it down, and not touched it since. A piece of tape with a paint code for a repair he'd been waiting 6 years to make himself ready for. The dog had been waiting 3 days. He sat with that for a moment and let it be what it was without moving away from it. He was not a man with patience for self-deception in other people. He could read it across the counter, the customer who said the noise started yesterday when it had been going on for months. The one who said it just needs an oil change when the undercarriage was shot through. He had a specific expression he made in those moments, and he tried to keep it off his face, and he mostly managed. He had that expression on right now. He was wearing it at himself. The dog had been outside for 3 nights. He had said, "If you're still here in a couple days," she was there. He had told himself it didn't count, said to a parking lot, to the dark, to no one, to an animal that couldn't parse conditional clauses. He had constructed the argument carefully, and it had held up for 3 days, and it was not holding up anymore. Here on the shoulder, with his hand still warm from the vinyl of the seat where Rex used to sit, because the reason he'd said it at all, the reason those words had come out of his mouth at closing time on a Tuesday, was not carelessness. It was the part of him that was further along than the rest. The part that had already looked at that rope end and the 3 visible ribs and the flat ears and made a calculation his conscious mind had been arguing against ever since. That part had said, "Give me a couple of days to catch up." She had given him 3. He put the truck in reverse, backed up along the shoulder to the median, cut a plain gap in the concrete divider. No signage. Just an opening where a vehicle could cross. He'd driven past it in the other direction 1,000 times without using it. He pulled through it, pointed east. The headlights picked up the westbound lane ahead of him. Empty. And then he was in it, the highway running back toward Ridgecrest, the mile markers counting down instead of up, the same desert on both sides doing nothing different, not marking the occasion in any way. Just continuing to be the desert at 11:20 on a Wednesday night. He did not feel relief. He felt the way a man feels when he has finally stopped arguing with a conclusion he reached an hour ago clear, and tired, and faintly irritated with the time it took. Mile marker 12, mile marker 10. He passed the gas station, still lit, still no one at the pumps. He drove at the speed he always drove. Both hands on the wheel, heater on low. The cab quiet except for the engine and the road and the small familiar sounds of a truck that had been running long enough to have its own voice. Mile marker 6, mile marker 4. The town lights came up on the horizon, not bright, just the low-sodium glow of a small place at midnight. Gas stations and parking lots, and a few porch lights left on by people who weren't quite ready to stop expecting someone. He turned onto the shop road. His headlights swept the front lot and hit the wall, and he could see the overhang and the water tray and the caved left corner of the box all exactly where he'd left it, and he pulled in slow and cut the engine. He sat in the sudden quiet. He reached into the glove box for the small flashlight he kept there, clicked it on, pushed open the door and stepped out into the cold and crossed the lot. He crouched down and put the light on the box. The shop rag was inside, compressed in the center, still holding the shape of something that had been lying on it. The box was empty. He stood up fast, not running, moving with the particular directness of a man who has stopped pretending he doesn't care. He swung the flashlight left, then right. Along the base of the wall, she was at the far corner of the building, pressed into the angle where the stucco wall met the side fence, 2 walls on 2 sides. The deepest pocket of the lot. She was standing, not lying, both ears up. She had heard the truck come in. She was watching him from across the lot. He walked toward her, slow, straight. No performance of casualness. The flashlight in his left hand, pointed down at the asphalt so it didn't hit her eyes. When he was 4 feet away, he stopped and crouched down and set the flashlight on the ground beside him. His beam angled toward the wall. She didn't move back. He stayed still, his knees on the cold asphalt, his hands open at his sides, his breath coming out in small white clouds in the flashlight's edge. He did not reach toward her. He just stayed there at her level and waited, and let the waiting be the thing. Her nose moved, forward, then back, then forward again. He extended his right hand the way Frank had done 3 days ago, low, palm up, still, patient in the way that cost something. She stretched her neck. Her nose touched his knuckles, dry and warm. She pulled back 1 inch and then came forward again and held there, her nose against the base of his fingers, breathing. He turned his hand over slowly. She let him. He moved his hand along her jaw. Careful, no sudden shifts. She held rigid for a moment, the whole body going tight the way a held breath goes tight, and then something in her back legs released and she leaned a fraction of an inch toward his hand and he felt it against his palm. He sat all the way down on the asphalt, both legs out, cold coming through his jeans immediately. She watched him settle. Then she walked forward 2 steps and stood beside him and put her chin on his knee and stayed there. He sat with her like that for a while in the dark parking lot without moving. The cold worked through his jacket at the shoulders. His breath and hers both showed in the air. Above the shop roof, the stars were out the way they get in the desert after a cold front clears hard and close and indifferent to everything below them. He reached under her with both hands. She tensed 1 full second of full-body resistance. The instinct older than any experience she'd had with him, and then she let it go. He lifted her and she weighed almost nothing, and he stood up in the midnight lot of a 1-bay auto shop in Ridgecrest and held her against his chest. She smelled like cold concrete and desert dust and the particular damp of an animal that had been outside a long time. She pressed her chin against his collarbone and did not move. He carried her inside. He set her on the welcome rag just inside the door and went back to the workbench, behind the oil drum, in the gap between the drum and the wall. The blue ceramic bowl sat where it always sat. He picked it up, turned it over once the chip on the rim, the name on the bottom in permanent marker, faded, but still there. Rex. He stood there with the bowl in both hands for a moment. Then he walked to the utility sink and filled it and set it on the floor. She crossed to it without hesitation, drank with her head down and her eyes up, watching him over the rim, the slow, careful drinking of an animal that had been managing its thirst for days. Her tail moved, not the twice then stopped from before, a slow, continuous motion, like something that had been waiting for permission and had finally run out of reasons to keep waiting. He watched her drink from Rex's bowl and said nothing. Frank's truck came at 8:15 the next morning. He got out and saw her through the shop window before Mike stepped outside, saw her lying on the welcome rag near the workbench, chin on her paws, both ears tracking the door. Frank stood at the glass for a moment, pushed his cap back. Mike came out. "She got a name yet?" Frank said. "Working on it." Frank nodded, the particular nod of a man who has said everything he needed to say and is content to let the outcome speak. He put his hands in his jacket pockets. "Take your time." He left at 8:20 without coming inside. Eleanor arrived at noon with a can of proper dog food, not the gas station brand. The good kind. The kind with a pull tab and a smell that brought the dog to her feet before Mike got the lid off. Eleanor set it on the counter. She looked at the bowl on the floor and the dog beside it, and the way the dog's eyes tracked Mike across the shop without losing him for a second. She didn't say anything about any of it. "You didn't have to," Mike said. "I know," she said. She went back to her flowers. Cole stopped by at 2 in the Tahoe. He stood in the bay door and looked at the dog. She looked back at him with the same level attention she gave to everything. "You taking her to Dr. Reyes tomorrow. Get her checked out." Cole pulled out his notebook, made a notation, closed it. "I'll mark the file closed. I'll bring the paperwork by when you get back from Reyes." He looked at the dog one more time. She did something not many animals do. He got in the Tahoe and drove north on 178. The paperwork of the county adjusted itself around one decision made on a highway shoulder at 11:15 on a Wednesday night. At 3:40 the shop was quiet, one car on the lift, the Motorola running. Mike at the workbench with a carburetor that needed cleaning methodical work, the kind that left room in the mind for other things. She was asleep on the welcome rag, on her side now, legs loose, the bent ear folded against the floor, the straight one tipped slightly toward the sound of his tools. Her breathing was slow and even. Her ribs rose and fell. Her paws moved once a quick running motion, small and private. Then gone. Mike set the carburetor down. He said it quietly, in no particular direction. The way a man says something he has been carrying for a while. "Ember." She didn't open her eyes. Her tail swept once against the concrete floor and was still. He picked up the carburetor and went back to work. 5:30. Closing. She took the passenger seat before he'd formed an opinion about it, climbed over the console the way she'd apparently already decided it was going to be, and sat with her nose at the window gap he'd cracked open for her. He drove home the same road he always drove. The dent on the passenger door caught the last light for a moment. The cracked paint, the pushed-in metal. And Mike looked at it the way you look at something you've been carrying long enough to know its weight by heart. He'd get to it this weekend. He had the paint code. He had everything he needed. At home, he set her bowl on the kitchen floor and filled it, and she ate while he heated the leftover chili on the stove. He ate over the sink. She finished before he did and walked to the couch and looked at it, and then looked at him. He didn't say anything. She climbed up, circled twice, and settled with her chin on the far armrest. He sat down. The forecaster on the evening news said, "Clear skies through the weekend. Lows in the mid-40s, warmer stretch coming." He reached over and his hand rested on her side. Her ribs still too close to the surface. That would change. Outside. The desert went quiet and cold in the way it does when a difficult stretch of weather has finally passed, not recovered, not resolved, but settled into whatever came next. He left the lamp on and let her sleep. There is something quiet that stays with you after a story like this, Not loud, not sharp, just a kind of weight you carry for a while without quite knowing where to set it down. That feeling is familiar. Most of us know what it is to wait on someone who may not come back. To hold a door open past the point where it makes sense. To keep something a bowl, a dent, a name, because letting go of it would mean admitting the loss is permanent. Many of us have been the one waiting. Some of us have been the one who almost kept driving. Neither of those things requires explaining. You don't have to arrive anywhere with what you're feeling right now. It doesn't need to be resolved tonight. Some things are allowed to just sit with you for a while, warm and unfinished, the way a good story does when it was told honestly and without pretending the world is simpler than it is. Thank you for staying with this one all the way to the end. It means more than you know.